I remember Zhang Ruonin as one of the most legendary figures in the legal world. She was unbeatable in court. In the eyes of others, she seemed ideal and beautiful. But for me, her legal husband, everything looked different. He showed me complete disrespect. Every conversation we had was like talking to a servant. It seemed as if the boss was giving orders to his subordinate. Even after 3 years of marriage, she never let me touch her. I thought a strong woman like her was simply cold by nature. Until I overheard from her kind sister that Ruonin loved men who could challenge her, like Jiang Cheng, her first love. I just smiled bitterly. There are two legends in the legal world. One of them is Zhang Ruonin, and the second one is me, as I was 3 years ago. I hid my true identity when I married her. All these years, I have been a caring husband to her. I was her faithful support. I have played my role patiently, but now I don't want to pretend anymore. I stood in front of the window on the landing. I hesitated for 3 seconds, just 3 seconds to make a decision. I finally made up my mind. Chen Liu was shocked by my call. I said I was ready to get back into business. My voice was quiet, but every word cut like a sharp knife. Chen Liu couldn't believe what he was hearing. The cup of coffee fell from his hands. He was beside himself with excitement. This is incredible news. You know how much Shounen has been harassing our company in recent years, right? After you retired, she took over 20 major cases from us. We were suffocated under her pressure for those 3 years. I stared thoughtfully at my reflection in the glass. I was wearing simple lounge clothes and there were even stains on my pants. Who would have thought that I was the same lawyer who once made his opponents faint in court? By the way, did Junin ever guess who you really are over all these years? She doesn't need to know that. I've already prepared the divorce papers, I snapped, interrupting Chen Liu. The next time we meet, it's in the courtroom. I hung up the phone, wanting only one thing, to return to my room. My phone vibrated, a message from Junin. I'm too drunk, come and get me. I'd been watching this unfold for a while now. 3 years passed. She was always like this, curt, giving orders as if to a subordinate. Nightclub VIP room. I wanted to push the door open. Laughter came from inside. Junin, you win again this time. You're a true legend. Is there a challenge in our business you can't handle? Not at all. There was also Alan who could have stood up to me. It's a shame he retired 3 years ago, vanished without a trace, probably got married. Haha, not necessarily. Junin, you've been married for 3 years. Your husband disappears to the law firm every day. He hardly even comes home, but 3 years have passed. Are you still afraid of Fang Yuan? You still want to ask about that? Junin can't stand men like that. If it weren't for that time she overindulged. How could she marry him? She likes men who can fight on equal terms like Jiang Cheng. So many years have passed and she still remembers everything. At the mention of Jiang Cheng's name, a dark-skinned man, walked into the room. The room suddenly fell silent. Everyone stared at me. I didn't care. I looked around and saw Zhang Ruonin sitting modestly on the sofa. Her eyes were closed, her face seemed serene. She looked especially graceful in the dim light. I walked over and helped her up, her hands falling on my shoulders. The familiar perfume mixed with the smell of alcohol, taking me back to that ridiculous night 3 years ago. I sat her down in the back seat of the car when suddenly she grabbed my wrist and pulled me towards her. I felt the warmth of her lips. In 3 years of marriage, not counting that one night, she had never kissed me. Until she whispered the name of that other person. Jiang Cheng, she mistook me for him. I felt pain as I looked at the woman in front of me. Do you really love him that much? A hot breath touched my face. The car door was closed, the kiss was over, but the taste of alcohol still lingered on my lips. You're still drunk, I said. Don't leave me, she muttered, and I slowly closed my eyes. A moment later, I pulled the divorce agreement out of my pocket. If you don't want me to leave, sign these papers. Junin looked at me with a blank, drunken gaze. I knew she wasn't seeing the real me at that moment, but in the end. She signed the document anyway. She had only a month left to sort everything out, get a divorce certificate, and finally be free. I smiled bitterly as I saw her signature on the divorce papers. My thoughts were in a tangled mess, and the moonlight fell softly on the car's interior. I remembered the first time I saw her. It was at a trial across the Taiwan Strait. I had just won a case of theft and self-defense, and that was the first time our eyes met. I walked out of the courtroom. This man, Junin, ran up and pinched my neck. When it started to hurt, I squeezed her wrist tightly. Do you want to add to your punishment? Her cold voice sounded like a blade touching my ear. I looked up, meeting her bright black eyes. My heart betrayed me. That's when I met the woman who would become my main professional rival. Zhang Ryunin. Everything has changed since then. While on business trips to Nanchang, I often saw her in court, but we remained silent rivals. I even stopped by her usual boxing club, but she didn't recognize me, until that night. I picked up a drunken Ryunin at a bar. She grabbed my wrist with unexpected force. "Why did you leave?" she asked. I didn't understand the meaning of her words. But there was no time to think. Her kiss crashed over me like a storm. That night we shared everything, and in the morning, she stared at the blood stain on the sheets. She was silent for a long time. "Let's get married," she said. I remained silent, confused. I turned away, almost immediately avoiding the answer. After the wedding, I hid my identity as the legendary Alan. She was always cold to me. We hardly spent time together, living in separate rooms. I thought it was just her personality and hoped that someday I could melt her icy heart. Until one day, I found a photograph in her office. It showed a boy in a white shirt standing on a bridge with a sharp, mocking smile. On the back was an inscription, sharp as a knife. "If I can't marry you, I'll marry anyone." Later, I realized it was her first love, the famous pianist Jiang Cheng, who went abroad after graduating. I understood why we broke up in the way she meant it. Years passed, and she still couldn't forget him. The night we got married, she got drunk because she found out Jiang Cheng had found a new love abroad. I saw this 3 years into our marriage. She baked me a cake for my birthday, but I saw her throw the dinner I made in the trash. And after she returned from her trip, she simply abandoned me on the highway. I lost control trying to catch up with her car. At that moment, my heart seemed to stop forever. It was a miracle I didn't flip over on the highway. I had to pursue a woman whose heart was never mine. If she's so in love with him, why can't I just go back to being Alan? I prepared a divorce agreement between her and myself because she was so looking forward to Jiang Cheng. I put the papers in my bag and drove Ryunin home. He started packing his things overnight. In the morning, she woke up and saw the boxes. She frowned. "What are you doing?" I continued, folding clothes. "Just packing up my things after our marriage," I replied. Such scenes didn't bother her. She thought I was just messing around the house as usual. I wasn't putting my heart into it. I got up to wash up, finishing the last few things. I left the box in plain sight. The doorbell rang. Who had arrived so early? Opening the door, I saw Jiang Cheng. He was dressed in simple clothes with a soft, almost meek smile. "You're Ryunin's husband, right? Hello. I'm her old friend Jiang Cheng. Is she home now?" I nodded silently, looking at him. I let him in. Ryunin left the room, and I saw how her face transformed. She was obviously incredibly happy, but her voice remained reserved. "Why are you here?" Jiang Cheng began to talk about his business. He pulled out a folder of documents and handed it to Ryunin. "You know, I need to get a divorce, but my case is too complicated. No lawyer wants to take this on. Can you help?" Ryunin resolutely took matters into her own hands. "Okay," she said. Then she called her partners, demanding they hand over all the cases to her so she could personally handle Jiang Cheng's divorce. The people on the other end of the line were shocked. "Ryunin, the firm is busy with criminal cases. Why are you suddenly taking on a divorce?" The client didn't even provide any compelling evidence. "Proving their relationship broke down will be difficult. The court will likely refuse. Entrust this to a civil lawyer. Shuya is an expert in this," they advised her. But I heard her whisper to herself, "No one should doubt my reputation as an invincible lawyer. She's full of tricks. Her fame is her top priority." Jiang Cheng began to get nervous after hearing all this. "There is no need for other lawyers. I take full responsibility for this case," she said. I watched it from the balcony. I knew what she was going through and heard the whole story firsthand. Jiang Cheng had a case with an 80% chance of losing. Ryunin had no experience in divorce proceedings. Even for a genius, it was a waste of time. It was an international divorce involving the laws of various states. Winning it was nearly impossible. She was a level-headed person, but for Jiang Cheng, her first love, she was willing to do anything. The following week, Ryunin put all her work aside. She spent days and nights in her office, studying legal intricacies. Jiang Cheng came every day, keeping an eye on things. Ryunin remembered all his tastes. She made him coffee, changed his flowers. She even changed the lamps at night if it was dark. As for what kind of tea I liked or what flowers I liked, she didn't care. Ryunin had never been interested in our daily affairs, and now only Jiang Cheng reigned here. I saw it all with my own eyes. I laughed at myself and just quietly cleaned up the mess they made, a mess I'll never have to clean up again. After throwing away the last box, I came back and heard Ryunin saying on the phone, "Cheng, I'm doing well, but it's difficult. Why not contact your partner, Alan? He's got a lot of experience with hopeless cases," someone suggested. She thought for a long time. She probably wanted Jiang Cheng's divorce to go perfectly. Her pride prevented her from immediately admitting the need, but she finally decided to check Alan's contacts. She entered the number and pressed call. The phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the words "wife" on the screen. I didn't answer. The phone continued to ring in the living room 8 times in a row. Ryunin frowned when she didn't receive an answer. Jiang Cheng brought her coffee, trying to calm her down. She decided to call later. As she hung up, she accidentally spilled coffee on the papers. The materials were ruined, the napkins were gone. Jiang Cheng was about to go get them, but then she called me. She asked me to buy new wipes. I grabbed my bag and headed to the store. On her phone screen, I saw 8 missed calls. It was just a string of numbers without any name. It turned out Zhang Ryunin didn't even have my number written down. No wonder she couldn't get through to the right person. I chuckled softly, stood up, and went to the kitchen. I made myself a simple breakfast. As I was reaching for a sandwich, the phone started ringing again. But I didn't answer. Ryunin probably thought she had dialed the wrong number and went to call the Baikeng Ziniao law firm. After hearing their conversation, I couldn't stand it. I briefly explained the legal nuances of the case, which she was trying to understand. Jiang Cheng didn't immediately grasp the gist of it when we started talking about federal requirements. I repeated it again, and Ryunin finally got it. She looked at me, a mixture of emotions in her gaze. "How do you know such subtleties?" she asked. My voice was calm. I graduated from law school. 5 years ago, I handled a similar divorce case. The plaintiff's case was dismissed for lack of evidence. A lawyer must be able to apply international law. I handled that case myself, so I understand how to proceed. I met her surprised look with my usual confidence. For the first time, Ryunin saw me as more than just a stay-at-home husband, but a professional. For a moment, she softened, and for the first time, she wanted to ask me about my past. But there was no time for conversation. She followed my advice and continued preparing materials for the case. I no longer cared about the little things. I returned to studying my affairs, preparing for the coming changes. The days dragged on. I was absorbed in my work and didn't pay attention to the world around me until one day Ryunin came to see me. She told me that Jiang Cheng had successfully divorced and didn't even bother to thank me for the tips. She invited me to a piano concert. No need, I just waved her off and continued reading the book. Ryunin didn't leave. She was looking at the book I was holding in my hands. It was the work of the famous Alan. "Are you an Alan fan?" she asked. I subconsciously covered the cover with my hand. She understood something, but I just nodded, not wanting to continue this conversation. Alan was idolized by many in the legal world. I didn't want to reveal my identity. I just wanted to relax. "What time does it start?" I agreed to go for a change of scenery. Fortunately, the questions stopped. I was waiting for her in the car. Jiang Cheng's assistant met us at the concert hall and escorted us to the VIP area. Ryunin was a regular guest at his performances, always bringing flowers with the very scent Jiang Cheng loved so much. "I thought you lived alone," a woman in the audience whispered to her. "I didn't expect you to be married. Your husband is so handsome." Ryunin just listened silently. For the first time, I realized how often she traveled abroad to visit him. I looked at the floor. I remembered that night before his departure, how I packed his luggage, how I baked him some pastries. I hoped that he would return early, wished him a safe journey, not even suspecting then that he would take her heart. There was only him in her life. I smiled bitterly at my own stupidity, but soon I will find my freedom. In the VIP box, besides Ryunin and me, there was a couple with a child. Once the performance began, everyone was immersed in the music. Even a small child listened very seriously. There was a 20-minute break in the middle. The child jumped with delight. "This brother is so great. How does he play such difficult music?" The little boy asked his mother to tell him a story about the artist. I got up and went to the bathroom to avoid listening to the admiration for Jiang Cheng. When I returned, I heard Ryunin's voice, proudly talking about his musical family and career since he was 2 years old. She listed his achievements, a genius who was noticed by the best masters of Europe. Ryunin never lied. Her delight was genuine, and that's what hurt me most. After the concert, Jiang Cheng invited us to a restaurant to thank us for our help. We met their mutual friends at the door. Jiunin asked me to wait while they chatted with the restaurant's customers. "You are friends of Ms. Zhang and Mr. Jiang, right?" The waiter, who remembered them as regular customers, spoke to me. He was very kind to Jiang Cheng, helping him cut up crabs and serving him wine. "He went abroad and Mrs. Zhang stayed here," the waiter chattered. "She ordered his favorite dishes every time and sat here alone, waiting for his return." Now that he had returned, everyone was waiting for their wedding. I listened to this chatter with a stony face. They soon arrived. Jiang Cheng, as usual, was ordering food for Ryunin. The dishes arrived. He threw a kerchief over his head and began separating the crab meat to put on Ryunin's plate. Then he looked at me. He offered me a taste, but Ryunin's hand holding the plate froze, and he ended up giving the meat to her. For the first time in my marriage, I felt real care, but it wasn't directed at me. I watched the scene with longing. "I'm allergic to seafood," I said calmly. Ryunin frowned in surprise. "Allergy? How could I have cooked fish and shrimp at home all these years?" I thought. "Because you like them," I replied, hiding my resentment. It never mattered to her that I loved her. They continued to talk, completely ignoring me. I sat at the table, invisible, trying to eat something else. At that moment, the waitress was bringing fish soup. The children rushed past, pushing her, and a vat of boiling water flew straight at us. At the critical moment, Ryunin subconsciously pushed Jiang Cheng aside, shielding him with her body. Boiling water splashed over me. The pain was unbearable. My skin instantly turned red and blisters appeared. This was the price of my devotion. I stood there, sweating from the searing pain and the realization that she would never choose me. A heavy silence hung in the air. No one expected such sincere, bittersweet words. Jiang Cheng looked at Ryunin, his eyes filled with confusion mixed with selfish satisfaction. I felt something inside me finally break. This spectacle was no longer bearable. I turned around and walked out of the club before the evening was over. The air outside was cool and sobering. I was walking through the city at night without a specific destination. My phone vibrated quietly in my pocket. I took it out and saw a message from Jiunin. "Where are you? I can't find you." I didn't answer. I simply turned off the device and tossed it into the nearest trash can. The next morning, I woke up in a cheap hotel where I had rented a room with my last money. My thoughts were purer than ever. No more pretense, no more playing the faithful husband. I began to pack my meager belongings. My backpack contained only the bare essentials. I have decided that today will be the beginning of my new life, where there is no place for legal intrigues for the sake of someone else. At noon, I went to the office to formalize the final severance of all remaining ties. Chen Liu greeted me with a wide smile, but upon seeing my serious face, he immediately became quiet. "You look different, Alan," he whispered, barely containing his excitement. "I'm coming back," I replied, looking him straight in the eye, "but on my terms." We spent several hours discussing strategy. I felt the taste of victory again, even before I'd started. I was a legend in this world, and it was time to remind everyone why that was so. Meanwhile, chaos reigned in Ryunin's house. She still couldn't figure out where I had disappeared to. Jiang Cheng kept calling her, trying to find out what happened at the party, but she was too lost in her thoughts. For the first time in 3 years, she felt a void in her life that she couldn't explain. She tried to find me at the law firm, but no one knew where I was. She was looking through old documents, hoping to find at least some clue about my past. And then she stumbled upon a case I had once hidden from everyone, my very first successful trial. The name Alan surfaced in old archives, and it dawned on her. She realized who had been by her side all these years. Her hands shook as she turned the pages, each piece fitting into a puzzle. She realized that the husband she had considered a worthless parasite was the very genius she had admired. The realization of her mistake hit her harder than any legal failure. She rushed to the car to go to that same boxing club where we had once crossed paths. But of course I wasn't there. I was already far away, making my own plans. That same evening, she came to our house and found only emptiness. My things were gone, the divorce agreement was signed and left on the table. She reread every line. My words were cold and formal. For the first time, she truly cried, not for Jiang Cheng, but for the loss of the man who had been devoted to her. But it was too late. My decision was final. Jiang Cheng tried to console her, but she only pushed him away. She realized that his love was just an echo of the past, and mine was the present that she had missed. A week passed. Rumors of my return began to spread throughout the city. Customers began lining up at Alan's. I worked for days, forgetting about everything except new tasks. Every task was a way for me to prove that I no longer belonged to her. One day after the hearing, I saw her in the court corridor. She stood there looking as perfect as ever, but there was a tired look in her eyes. Our eyes met, the world around us seemed to freeze. She opened her mouth to say something, but I just walked past. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. My life was now mine alone. That evening, I opened a bottle of expensive wine, celebrating my freedom. The moon outside the window was shining just like it did that night when we signed the documents. But now it seemed to me like a harbinger of a new dawn, not the end of the road. I no longer looked at photographs from the past. I looked only forward into the future, where I would finally become myself. I left the house silently. Returning to an empty apartment, I began to put my post-divorce affairs in order. Over the years of marriage, Zhang Ruonin had amassed a substantial fortune, and by law, I was entitled to exactly half of our shared property. Legally, I was entitled to this share, but I didn't need all these assets and capital. I simply took my share and made a final decision to donate all the money to charity. Zhang Ruonin never showed up at home. I had no idea what she was doing or where she was. However, the silence was broken by a call from Jiang Cheng, who suggested we meet and talk. We were sitting in a cafe. Jiang Cheng began the conversation with polite but familiar remarks. Mr. Fang, my friend, simply overindulged that day. I ignored his words, not wanting to delve into his excuses. If I've offended you in any way, I hope you'll show some dignity, he added. Jiang Cheng began apologizing for the incident at his birthday party. I listened to this nonsense, knowing it was all empty words. There would be no next time. I'm leaving soon, Nan Cheng, I said, trying not to take his apology to heart. Hearing this, Jiang Cheng's expression was a mixture of indifference and hidden joy. You're leaving. Is it because of me? Sorry, I dated Zhunin before, but that was a long time ago. I clearly saw the happiness in his eyes. He looked at me straight in the eye. Mr. Jiang, did you really let her go, even if you did? Zhang Ruonin never let her go, I thought. He had to put on headphones every day, listen to you play the piano, read his name. Every year for his birthday, he bought a cake for home. I sat in the office until late at night, exhausting myself with old medical records. Suddenly, I was overcome with such monstrous fatigue that no amount of concentration helped. I couldn't reach her heart. This fact proved that true love cannot be replaced by anything. I was exhausted and finally decided that this marriage had to end. Jiang Cheng listened to me for a long time and then asked again, as if he didn't believe me, so you're really going to divorce Ruonin? Yes, the agreement is signed. The waiting period ends tomorrow. Anything related to Zhang Ruonin in the future no longer concerns me. I spoke frankly without even looking at his reaction. He stood up, preparing to leave, but as soon as I opened the door, a crowd of frantic Jiang Cheng fans burst in. I wanted to break out immediately, but I found myself trapped. The curtain had fallen and the door was blocked. Outside, someone was furiously knocking on the box. We were trapped. Jiang Cheng didn't expect the fans to spot him here. He had no choice but to call Zhang Ruonin and beg for help. She arrived quickly. Squeezing through the doorway, Zhang Ruonin glanced around at the chaos in the room. Cheng, too many fans have been reading your posts. The only way out is to swap coats so you won't be recognized. We'll leave first, she said. Jiang Cheng, already experiencing the pleasure of being followed, immediately looked at me with a pleading expression. My heart completely froze. She had come up with the perfect way to protect her Moondon, but did she think for a second about what would happen to me? I pressed my lips together in agitation but remained silent. I took off my coat. When we changed, Zhang Ruonin didn't even deign to glance at me. She left with Jiang Cheng. The box door opened briefly and I immediately locked myself in. I was wearing Jiang Cheng's clothes and listened to the growing murmur of the crowd outside. I waited a long time. The fans were losing patience. Finally, the box door was kicked down. A group of people rushed in, grabbing me and dragging me along with them. My hat, mask, and glasses were ripped off. Realizing I wasn't Jiang Cheng, the crowd's delight turned to anger. Someone shoved me hard to the floor. Curses rained down. Dozens of feet trampled me, leaving painful wounds. I was in a terrible state. I tried to defend myself, but pain shot through my entire body. There wasn't enough oxygen in my chest. I was literally suffocating. Screams could be heard somewhere in the distance. Cheng left half an hour ago. There's no one else here. When the fans realized Jiang Cheng was gone, they left me alone. I was sickened by everything that was happening. As soon as I got back on my feet, I was so devastated that when I got to the hospital, I could only think of one thing. I've made my mind up. It's time to leave this city. My relationship with Zhang Ruonin is over. Returning home, I booked a plane ticket. The airline called to confirm. I replied, yes, the flight departs at 10 a.m. Zhang Ruonin walked into the room without even looking at me. Where are you going at 10 in the morning? She asked. I was stunned but silently hung up. Instead of moping, I decided to meet up with old friends. Zhang Ruonin didn't care. She didn't even ask any follow-up questions. She took off her coat, glanced at me, and saw the marks of the beating. Are you hurt? I'm sorry, I didn't expect the fans to be so crazy. I really didn't. I didn't care anymore. I just chuckled and said nothing. Seeing my silence, Zhang Ruonin still didn't understand the essence of what was happening. It's true, you've been sitting at home too long. In the future, you'll have the opportunity to go out with friends. It's good to see the world. After this conversation, as soon as the news about Jiang Cheng arrived, Zhang Ruonin grabbed the phone and went into the office. I simply nodded softly, watching her go. Tomorrow I'll finally see the world, no more isolation. The next morning I got up very early. I took the divorce papers with me. I ran into Zhang Ruonin, who was just about to leave. Do you have time? I have something important to tell you. I want to talk about the divorce. Zhang Ruonin glanced at her watch and replied irritably, if you have anything to say, wait for me to return. I have things to do. In that case, there's nothing to talk about. Here's what I wanted to convey, I said, pulling out the divorce certificate. Zhang Ruonin, without looking, tossed aside my phone, which had started ringing again from Jiang Cheng, and without glancing at the papers, threw them into the desk drawer. She picked up the car keys and, without turning around, walked out. I quietly said after him, no, I won't come back this time. I watched her leave for the last time, and deep down I answered her, goodbye. I returned to the bedroom, gathered my things, and left the villa. The moment the door slammed shut, I took a deep breath. The chains that had held me for 3 years had finally fallen. I stood at the door of Xiniao Law Firm. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. In an instant, all eyes turned to me. The businessmen accustomed to working with us froze in shock. Someone even dropped their coffee cup. Alan Chen Liu, I said, smiling slightly. My gaze was calm and determined. 3 years had passed since I disappeared from the profession. The time had come to return. That same day, I took on a high-profile cross-border commercial dispute. Foreigners were trying to acquire a domestic tech company. Hundreds of billions in assets were at stake. No one in the country would risk it, but I signed the contract without hesitation. Meanwhile, Zhang Ruonin stands outside Jiang Cheng's house, clutching a silk box. She's apparently helping him choose a diamond setting. Sunlight floods the street. The diamond seems dull, and she remembers my cold, disappointed eyes. She can't hold the box. Just admit it, she thinks, looking at the door. Jiang Cheng opened the door, his eyes practically shining with anticipation. He was wearing a light lounge suit, giving him the appearance of a harmless and gentle man. Ruonin, why are you here? He blinked, feigning surprise. Zhang Ruonin was still asleep at the time, so he simply decided to keep it a secret. I didn't say I'd go look for Linda with you today, he replied with a smile, then caught himself. Oh, I completely forgot. Wait, I'll change my shoes. Zhang Ruonin took the wheel. Jiang Cheng was acting different than usual, whereas before he'd been patient, today he was deliberately calm, almost unnatural. They headed toward the suburbs. It was early autumn, the sun was filtering through the leaves. Jiang Cheng walked alongside, chattering incessantly about plants and the workings of the world like a first-year college student. Zhang Ruonin gradually relaxed. At noon, we had lunch in the garden. Jiang Cheng ordered my favorite dish and brought red wine, although she was clearly not in the best mood today. He was sure Zhang Ruonin was looking at him closely. Was it really that obvious? When she frowned, a fine line appeared between her brows. He reached out, his fingers hovering an inch from her face. He had no more strength to pretend, his head beginning to spin slightly from the thoughts that flooded his mind. That afternoon, we went to the movies. In the dark, Jiang Cheng carefully touched my fingers. They were cold, and Zhang Ruonin seemed thirsty, but he simply held back. He continued to play his role. It's better not to even give him a chance to leave the house, I thought, feeling how everything inside me froze with icy calm. I approached Jiang Cheng after he finished his phone call. His expression was confused, but he immediately tried to regain his normal demeanor. After waiting for a pause, I asked directly, Zhang Ruonin, was it you who orchestrated the fans' attack on me? Jiang Cheng's smile didn't waver. Ruonin, what are you talking about? I took a step forward, not letting him avoid answering. You started this bullying yourself and now you want to complain about the consequences. There's no animosity between us. I even helped you with your business. Jiang Cheng's expression changed abruptly. Why are you doing this? You're saying things that aren't true. You must have misheard. How could I? I couldn't resist interrupting him. Throwing the handcuffs on the table, I added, we all need to calm down. Jiang Cheng looked at me with feigned confidence. Ryunin, how can you not believe me? We've known each other for so long. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. I turned around and left. When I returned home, I found the apartment pitch dark. I turned on the lights. My slippers were by the door. My coat wasn't on the shelf, meaning she hadn't returned yet. Standing in the empty living room, I suddenly felt unbearably tired. I turned off my phone and collapsed on the couch, closing my eyes. 3 days later, the court issued a ruling on my case. My tone was calm, but it left no room for doubt. That was enough for me. On the day of the trial, the opposing team was full of confidence, thinking that a lawyer with 3 years of experience would bend over. However, as soon as I began speaking, the entire room was caught in my arguments. My logic was impeccable. I had calculated all their moves in advance. Every time they tried to refute my arguments, I found a loophole and struck a precise blow, citing Article 37 of international law. The contract they presented was a forgery, and the court representative deliberately concealed key facts. I didn't shout, I was simply confident I was right. This had ceased to be a commercial dispute and had become a criminal case of financial fraud. Their lawyer's face turned pale. The judge watched the proceedings closely. In the end, I won. I dispelled all the rumors with my professional skills. When I left the courtroom, the media went crazy, under the blinding flashes of cameras. When I got home, I opened my desk drawer and found a red folder there. I picked it up and opened it. It was our divorce certificate. Zhang Ryunin stared at the papers, her pupils narrowed, her fingers clenched. When, she whispered, grabbed her phone and tried to call me. But the only response was a cold answering machine. The subscriber is temporarily unavailable. Over and over, the same mechanical sound. She tried to contact my friends, but discovered she deleted all of them. I disappeared from her digital life. Where are you? The message on the screen glowed red. She was lying to herself. In 3 years, she had never once tried to genuinely contact me. I used to be the one sending the messages, but now I'm gone. There was no longer any connection. Zhang Ryunin was completely confused. At that moment, Zhang Ryunin's phone rang. Ryunin, I heard you and Mr. Fan got divorced. His voice sounded like a test. Zhang Ryunin remained silent, then replied. Jiang Cheng seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Jiang Cheng's tone softened. You know, after I came back, I always wanted to tell you. I never forgot you all these years. He fell silent, his voice timid. If you're ready, we can start over. Zhang Ryunin was once his property, and he hoped. More than anything, she wanted to hear it sooner. But now she held the divorce papers in her hands. The house around her seemed dark, and Jiang Cheng's voice echoed in her ears. But in her head, all she could hear was my voice. How I cooked soup, how I helped her with the paperwork, how I reminded her to dress warmer. Memories came flooding back. Ryunin, are you still listening? Cheng, I'm sorry. I don't feel like talking about it right now, she eventually answered. That night, Zhang Ryunin sat in her office. The Bar Association news was displayed on her computer screen. Her gaze was fixed on nothingness. She sat motionless for a long time. Suddenly, a message popped up in her news feed. To everyone's surprise, Alan, the 3-year-old lawyer who had garnered attention, disappeared from view. He had defeated an international legal team. She opened the article, and a photo from the courtroom appeared before her eyes. Zhang Ryunin's breath caught. It was me in the photo. Her fingers trembled as she zoomed in. She looked at that face, familiar and yet completely alien. What's going on, she thought. Is Alan a prude? No, he's just the boss of his own life. My mind was blank and my lips felt numb with realization. It seemed impossible. Suddenly, I remembered one late night when Zhang Ryunin was sitting on the sofa reading a book on international law. The memories became clearer. The book was called Alun. I assumed she'd simply borrowed it or found it by chance. Zhang Ryunin never considered me the author of these works. But I once went over Jiang Cheng's divorce proceedings in her presence, analyzing the mistakes and complex legal subtleties that were beyond her capabilities. She once saw my massive legal encyclopedia, where every corner was marked with an Alun sign. I even mentioned a case from 5 years ago to her, but she never asked. I stood before her every day, but she never truly looked at me. never tried to find out who I really was. After this debate, Zhang Ruonen stood up. She grabbed the car keys and ran out of the house. She had to find me and ask me directly. I was just leaving when my phone rang. It was a partner from the law firm. Alan, have you seen the news? You're back. Actually, it was me, Fang Yuan. Oh my god, they were asking me to contact Alan so he could help them. Zhang Ruonen froze at this point, staring at her phone screen like a white horizon. I know, I'll find him now, she replied and hung up. But where was she going to look for me? I wasn't in Beijing. She hung up, her car took off like a sword being released. Zhang Ruonen rushed to Beijing in the dead of night. She didn't check into the hotel but went straight to the Xingyao building. The windows were dark. She stood below, looking at the blackened facade. She felt like if she stared long enough, she'd hear my voice. The names Fang Yuan and Alan pulsed incessantly through her mind. These thoughts cut through her mind like a knife. She called our former classmate Liu Zai. Help me check who Alan is. He laughed. Are you serious? You didn't know that Alan is Fang Yuan? It's weird that he retired 3 years ago and now he's back. Wait, so Fang Yuan isn't your husband? Liu Zai's voice sounded shocked. Zhang Ruonen nearly crushed the phone. It turns out the whole world knew about it. Only she remained unaware. Back at the hotel, Zhang Ruonen sat on the edge of her bed, her head pounding. She turned off her phone. She recalled photographs of me, usually standing quietly in a corner or bowing my head submissively in the kitchen. She never once looked at my face as if I were just part of the furniture. Memories flooded back like a torrent of water. One day, she stepped into my office, saw the page marked Alan, and only frowned. She didn't even pay attention to my words about Jiang Cheng's divorce. They were clear, but she ignored them. I tried to talk at the dinner table, but she wouldn't listen. I never hid anything, but she didn't care. Suddenly, she flew into a rage. Anger at my silence, my aloofness, and her own blindness overwhelmed her. Zhang Ruonen threw the phone at the wall. There was a deafening crash as the screen shattered. The next morning, I finished the hearing at the Northern City Central Court and left the courtroom. I was wearing a strict black suit. My gaze was sharp as a blade, nothing in common with the good-natured Mr. Fun from before. I heard hurried footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around. Zhang Ruonen caught up with me and grabbed my wrist roughly. Why didn't you tell me you were Alan? Her voice trembled. I turned around abruptly and looked at her coldly. My lips curled into an ironic smile. Lawyer Zhang, we've been married for 3 years. Have you ever wondered who I am? You ignored me, never asked me first, and now you're making claims. My eyes were icy. I looked at her as if she were a stranger. Around me in the hallway, lawyers and reporters froze, watching us. I carefully but firmly removed her hand from my sleeve. I straightened my jacket and said with emphasis on formality, Lawyer Zhang, please behave professionally. We are just colleagues now. In the future, I will fight her as an adversary in court. Zhang Ruonen's phone was left in the hotel room, which prevented her from catching up with me. She sat on the floor, staring at the vibrating device. Jiang Cheng had sent over 20 messages. The last one was a voicemail. She opened it and heard a scream. Ruonen, I'll find you. Are you going to him? You said you hated him. You don't love him? The words echoed in her ears. Zhang Ruonen closed her eyes, listening to Jiang Cheng's hysteria. She was irritated. Fortunately, she had turned off her phone. She walked to the window, looking at the night lights of Baikeng, and remembered how 3 years ago, when we first got married, I carefully asked her, do you like Baikeng? To which she coldly replied, Nanchang is better. The next morning, the newspaper headlines were full of news. There was widespread speculation in legal circles that Zhang Ruonen and her ex-wife, the same Alan, were a couple. The photo shows us in the courtroom corridor. I looked cold and her eyes were filled with confusion. Zhang Ruonen's entire social circle was abuzz with rumors. So, Alan left for 3 years and lost her family because of Zhang Ruonen, the media wrote. People mocked her, saying she married my ex-wife, not even knowing that I was who she was. Rumor had it that I was in love with the pianist Jiang Cheng and that Alan was simply my substitute. Society mocked her ignorance. I didn't make any comments, let the noise continue. That midnight, Zhang Ruonen sat at the bar, downing glass after glass. The alcohol was too strong. She was in a daze, and for a moment it seemed to her that I was sitting opposite her. I was gentle. Ruonen, are you tired after work? She reached out her hand, but only grabbed empty space. She realized she had lost the person closest to her. Meanwhile, the media launched a new attack outside the higher law school building. It was a high-profile murder case. Prominent businessman Zhou Shikun was accused of eliminating a competitor. The evidence was overwhelming. The defense demanded that the legendary Zhang Ruonen handle the case, and the victim's family hoped for justice. Silence fell over the courtroom. I, as the lead prosecution lawyer, stood in the center of the room. My black suit emphasized my determination. My voice was clear. Defendant Zhou Shikun was at the crime scene. I called the deceased 3 times, and the records show. After the last call, the signal went out. The body was found this morning. I pressed the button on the remote, and a video of the accused's car appeared on the screen. The crime was planned. His car was spotted near the victim's house. I paused, looking around the room. We also found traces of DNA under the victim's fingernails. The court panicked. Zhang Ruonen frowned. This case was turning out to be much more complicated than she had imagined. Now it was my turn to argue my case. I stood up and walked to the witness stand. My tone was calm. The presence of the car only confirms that my client drove past. It doesn't prove he entered the house. I approached the expert group regarding the DNA evidence. My client and the victim were business partners. Naturally, there was physical contact between them. I spoke logically and sternly, every word carrying weight. This should have been a fair competition until my gaze accidentally fell on Zhang Ruonen. She was sitting, studying the case file. Her profile seemed cold, and her eyelashes cast shadows under the lamplight. For a moment, I thought I was seeing her again as she had been 3 years ago in the warm yellow light of the lamp. Then I sat quietly at the dining table, waiting for her to come home for dinner, but she always ignored me. Lawyer Zhang. The judge reminded her of the proceedings. Zhang Ruonen winced, returning to the topic, and for a moment forgot what question she had wanted to ask. I looked up, and she met my gaze. My eyes were cold as ice. When the case was closed, I stood up and returned to my team. The defendant insisted he had had an excellent relationship with the deceased. I pulled out the USB drive and handed over the recording. It happened a week before the crime. In a private club with no cameras, the deceased threatened the defendant. However, a waiter's camera was rolling at the entrance to the room. The recording was decisive. Zhou Shikun's voice literally trembled with hatred. "If you dare steal my project, I will destroy you," the recording read. My team was confused, and Zhou Shikun turned pale. He hadn't expected anyone to break into the room. He tried to bribe the waiter and didn't believe the corridor camera would show anything. They were simply drinking together, but the victim clearly didn't expect their wine to be spiked. I managed to collect all the evidence. The motive was clear, and this proved that it was a planned murder. Without looking at Zhang Ruonen, I turned to her. My tone was gentle, but my gaze was sharp. Lawyer Zhang. The law won't bend because of a defense attorney's name. The verdict struck like a hammer blow, crushing her confidence, when the judge called a recess. Zhang Ruonen sat in the defense bench, nervously tapping her fingers on the table. Previously, it was impossible to distract her in court, but today she couldn't stop looking at me. I just calmly answered her silent questions, consistently refuting all her arguments. Jiang Cheng secretly contacted the media and exposed the fact that I was married to Zhang Ruonen. He made it sound like I'd been fired 3 years ago due to fatigue, and now it was just revenge on my part. The news instantly spread across the internet. Alan's revenge and Zhang Ruonen's marriage became the main headlines. My firm's phone was ringing off the hook, and reporters were crowding the entrance. Lawyer Alan, admit it. Did you marry Zhang Ruonen illegally? Did you use this marriage as a means of revenge? Will you divorce her? They asked. I stood there with an inscrutable face until one of them shouted, "Zhang Ruonen, have you never loved him?" I stopped. I looked straight into the camera lens. First of all, everything written on the internet is rumor. Secondly, my marriage to Zhang Ruonen is officially dissolved. Please focus on business, not gossip. Having said that, I left. I felt like a straightened pine tree. I knew Zhang Ruonen had seen it all and was furious. She called Jiang Cheng. Her voice was cold and frightening. "Did you set this all up?" Her tone was decisive. Jiang Cheng began to defend himself, but she interrupted him. "I was simply telling the truth. I laughed when I found out about it. The truth is, 3 years ago I was drunk and made the mistake of accepting her marriage proposal. She was cold from the start." The conversation was interrupted, and Jiang Cheng exclaimed in despair, "You fell in love with him?" Zhang Ruonen remained silent. She hung up and looked out the hotel window at the Beijing nights. She was remembering how I looked in court that day, confident, brilliant, completely alien. I no longer waited for her return. Silence reigned in the room, interrupted only occasionally by the clicking of keys. These people were getting into my soul. I'm sorry that my personal life affected the company's reputation, I told my colleagues. Lawyer Chen, are you ready to return to work? They asked me. I just nodded, enough hiding. I looked at the reporters below. Why should I hide? The next day, at the Beijing Convention Center, I was wearing a formal white suit, standing in front of the podium. I didn't hire PR people. This was my fight, and I came to it alone. I want to explain everything regarding my relationship with Zhang Ruonen. My voice was icy. This wasn't a one-night stand. I pressed the button and a video appeared on the screen. Footage from 3 years ago, Zhang Ruonen drunk in an elevator, then screenshots of the messages she sent me after that night. Let's get married. I was married to her for 3 years, but she never took responsibility. I was subjected to psychological abuse. Even when I was seriously injured, she was not there. Photos of my burns and injuries appeared on the screen. The audience gasped. Everyone was shocked. What was Zhang Ruonen doing at that moment? The last photo answered everything. Zhang Ruonen ran out of the restaurant to see Jiang Cheng, who was pretending to be seriously ill. I was nothing to her this whole time. The conference was broadcast live. The entire world saw 2 elite lawyers and a famous pianist in a new light. The information was staggering. The internet exploded with discussion. Netizens were indignant. She left her husband for Jiang Cheng, who pretended to be weak all this time. I didn't shed a tear. I didn't pretend to be pathetic. I simply told the truth. Jiang Cheng's reputation began to crumble before his eyes. It turned out that he and Zhang Ruonen had been in contact before our divorce and had been lying to me for years. All of Jiang Cheng's tour were cancelled, and my colleagues in Nanchang watched the broadcast with triumphant smiles. Ruonen, do you realize how much this story has damaged our company's reputation? The owner, gesturing angrily, grabbed his head in his hands in rage, dropping his face onto the table. 3 major clients had already cancelled their contracts. Zhang Ruonen sat motionless, her gaze glued to the screen where my face was being broadcast. She hung on my every word. I calmly told other people's stories that were actually related to us. In Jiang Cheng's apartment, the phone was literally ringing off the hook with notifications. The smartphone screen kept flashing. Now the entire internet is cursing you. The tour is cancelled. The advertising contracts are gone. Even the sponsor, Shandu, has withdrawn its support. Are you happy? Jiang Cheng's breathing was heavy and ragged. His nails dug into his palms so hard they left marks on his skin, but the physical pain couldn't drown out the hatred. I did this. I, who had recently been her husband and now so demonstratively severed all ties. In a rage, he grabbed a vase from the tea table and threw it hard against the wall. The shards scattered all over the room. He blamed me for ruining his life with Ruonen. He thwarted my plan. Why? Jiang Cheng's voice rose to a screech, but at that moment, the phone vibrated again. A message arrived with Jiang Cheng's dark history, details of his studies abroad, exam cheating, and the rules he broke. His throat tightened as if an invisible hand were squeezing his breath. All the voices around him fell silent. The pianist who had previously been proud of his status was now crushed. Who had brought him into the light? Who had orchestrated all this? He felt cornered. His legs gave way and he collapsed back onto the sofa. The phone continued to buzz with incoming messages. Jiang Cheng's competition had been discredited. The judges officially admitted that the piano group had rigged the results, and the fans themselves announced the disbanding of the community. The news was like a punch to the gut. Jiang Cheng's heart sank in pain, and he clutched the phone so tightly that his fingers turned white. His vision blurred. Fang Yuan, is it you? He whispered, frozen in a daze. I just chuckled to myself, realizing there was no turning back. That night in the hotel in Beijing, Zhang Ruonen lay on the sofa, surrounded by empty bottles. She grabbed the phone, her fingers trembling slightly. For the first time in 3 years, she dared to make a call herself. The number she'd long remembered but hadn't dared dial. The line rang. The connection was established. Zhang Ruonen opened her mouth to ask why I did this, to find out how I was living. But in the end, she could only exhale. Why didn't you tell me you were Alun? The alcohol burned her throat, mixing with the painful memories. The phone's battery died. The answering machine's mechanical voice rang out. Sorry, the subscriber is temporarily unavailable. I set my number to automatically forward my call. The phone fell from Zhang Ruonen's hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was in utter despair. At that moment, I turned off the press conference broadcast. I went out onto the balcony to smoke, a habit I'd only recently developed. My phone rang, a message from Chen Liu. Breaking news, Zhang Ruonen is said to have spent 40 years in a greenhouse. Do you want me to reveal it? The night wind blew away the smoke, as did my memories of the past. 3 years of marriage, which at the press conference seemed calm, how absurd it looked. I entered the office archive. I stood among the shelves until my fingers came across a yellow folder. The Lin Zhiqiang murder case, my first criminal trial. I handled this case 5 years ago as an independent attorney. Lin Zhiqiang was charged with murder in the same place and under the same circumstances. I fought for his release on bail, but after the trial, Lin Zhiqiang was found strangled. If I die, I'll get you. The words sounded like a curse. Now the case has resurfaced. Lin Zhiqiang committed another murder while in prison. He was sentenced to death and he appealed. I helped Li Dan with the paperwork, essentially handling the case myself. 3 days later, we ran into Zhang Ruonen in court by chance. She was standing outside the defense office holding Lin Zhiqiang's petition. What a coincidence! She looked at me with a withering gaze. I just smiled. Ms. Zhang, when did you start defending those sentenced to death so zealously? She remained silent. I just want to sort this out. I'm not planning on going anywhere, she snapped. Really? On the day of the trial, Lin Zhiqiang attacked someone from behind. When he saw that I was the prosecutor, his eyes narrowed. It's you, he growled. I calmly opened the folder. Your Honor, I present new evidence. Defendant Lin Zhiqiang committed systematic assaults in prison and was involved in black market dealings. His reputation was terrifying. Video footage. After Lin Zhiqiang's attack, Zhang Ruonen stood up from her seat. These events have nothing to do with the conspiracy case. I just chuckled. Of course they do. I found a certificate about his mental illness. Lin Zhiqiang is extremely dangerous. I pressed the button on the remote control. The tracking system proved that he had stolen the knife. This isn't random violence, this is a planned murder. Zhang Ruonen clenched her fists. The chain of evidence was impeccable. When the judge called a break, Lin Zhiqiang, disheveled and furious, rushed towards me. If it weren't for you, I would have been free. The police knocked him down, but in the scuffle, Zhang Ruonen badly scratched her hands on the edge of the table. Blood dripped from my hands, but I stood motionless. 3 years ago, Zhang Ruonen had assisted me in court, and now we found ourselves on opposite sides of the barricades. The trial was adjourned. After a brief visit to the infirmary, I stood by the window in the hallway. I heard footsteps behind me. It was her. I didn't even turn around. I won this case. He almost killed you. Zhang Ruonen was shocked. She had no idea how much danger I was in. Yuan, lawyer Zhang, I interrupted. When I turned around, my gaze was cold. Did you really want to protect him when you took this case? Or is this just your ambition? Why did you even become a lawyer, Zhang Ruonen? My words caught her off guard. During the meeting, Zhang Ruonen made a shocking decision. She filed a motion for a retrial based on my new evidence. Lin Zhiqiang was furious. Zhang Ruonen looked at me. You're right, there are people who can't be protected. The death sentence remained in effect. The trial ended. It was raining outside and Zhang Ruonen ran out after me, trying to shield me with her umbrella. I watched her leave in the rain. Suddenly I asked, do you know why I married you back then? Zhang Ruonen was silent, unsure of what to say. I continued, that day you closed me off from the world and I thought I had finally met the one who would protect me. I walked out into the rain, the sounds of which swallowed up my voice. What a pity, you've caused me the most pain I've ever known. Zhang Ruonen's hands were swollen from the injury, but she seemed oblivious to the pain, ignoring the downpour. She ran a few steps, trying to catch up with me. We found ourselves under the same umbrella, as if locked in a cocoon of silence in the middle of a noisy city. I'm in pain, can you take me to the hospital? She raised her right hand, hoping for my pity. I only glanced at her injured hand. The emergency room at Beijing Central Hospital was quiet. The lights were blinding. Zhang Ruonen lay on the bed, her right arm bandaged. It was the wound Lin Zhiqiang had inflicted on her. I stood nearby, studying the examination report, and said into the void, her knuckles are broken. You need at least 2 weeks of rest. I turned to leave, taking my documents, but Zhang Ruonen grabbed my wrist with her left hand. Her voice trembled. I realized I've always loved you, I just couldn't admit it. Her eyes were red and she was on the verge of a breakdown, trying to get all her emotions out at once. I looked at her swollen hand and suddenly laughed. Zhang Ruonen, your love is really worthless. You were cruel to me for years until you found out I was Aelun, and now you suddenly fell in love." My voice was cold. "If I were just a nobody in your life, you wouldn't even look at me." "Isn't it appropriate to hear your excuses?" Zhang Ryunin looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. The hospital corridor swam before her eyes. The phone rang. "Mr. Jiang, return the evidence you stole," came Jiang Cheng's distorted voice, interspersed with hysterical laughter. "Okay, see you tomorrow." I returned to the law firm at dawn. Xiaoling's assistant nervously showed me the tablet. "Lawyer, there's a scandal online. Zhang Ryunin is injured and you spent the whole night in the hospital." There was a photo of me carrying her online. The comments were full of pain and misunderstanding. I just chuckled and put the tablet aside. An hour later, Xiniao released an official statement. Lawyer Fang Yuan's assistance was exceptionally professional. Any rumors of a personal relationship will be suppressed in court. Attached to the statement was a full video recording from the hospital. The footage clearly shows my cold face and the way I pull my hands away. Internet users fell silent. "Zhang Ryunin, is your face okay? You were so demonstratively pushed away." "They say Jiang Cheng loved you and now you regret what you did," people whispered around. In the VIP ward, Zhang Ryunin, looking at the screen, pulled out her IV and fell out of bed. An assistant rushed to her aid. "You can't get up," but she ignored me, threw her coat over her hospital gown and ran out into the rain. Her car sped toward my apartment. I saw her getting into her car, unaware that I had already left, taking care of new business in Beijing. The surveillance cameras continued to monitor them. Jiang Cheng looked at the photos and smiled into the phone. "Tomorrow's headlines will be about Aelun being happy and Zhang Ryunin suffering from wounds and despair. If I can't have it, then no one else will. Let's go down together." At 3 a.m., Zhang Ryunin's phone vibrated. Jiang Cheng sent a photo, the edge of the bathtub covered in blood. "Fang Yuan, goodbye." Zhang Ryunin's fingers trembled. Despite her awareness of the kind of person he was, a sense of responsibility made her jump. When she burst into Jiang Cheng's apartment, he was sitting on the couch with a slight scratch on his wrist. "You're lying again," she smirked. Jiang Cheng merely swung his wine glass lazily. Zhang Ryunin turned and left. But suddenly she felt dizzy. The wine was poisoned. Before she lost consciousness, she saw Jiang Cheng smiling, phone in hand. "Tomorrow the whole world will know you chose me." This morning, the topic Zhang Ryunin and Jiang Cheng exploded onto the search engine tops. The screenshots showed her in his apartment. "Mr. Allen, what do you think about this?" They peppered me with questions in court. I glanced at the photo and smiled. "I advise you to put on glasses. If you look closely, Zhang Ryunin's pupils are dilated. She's unconscious. This has nothing to do with my relationship." My calmness frightened them more than any anger. Zhang Ryunin woke up in the hotel with a splitting headache. She saw the photo and grabbed her keys, running outside. In her pocket was a flash drive with evidence. Jiang Cheng, still in his pajamas, opened the door. "Are you bored?" he began, but Zhang Ryunin had turned on the recording of their conversation. "I'll sue you for libel," he cried. "Are you crazy? I'll send you to play the piano in prison for the rest of your life," she replied icily. Zhang Ryunin posted an official statement on her account, along with an audio recording of Jiang Cheng admitting to the staging. "Finally, Lawyer Zhang has woken up," they wrote online. But I had long since turned that page. Some people will never go blind, but I was no longer one of them. "Aelun, is Mr. Zhang trying to atone for his sins against you?" the assistant asked. I looked into the distance. And what can atone for these years? He was obviously just trying to save his reputation. How could she allow herself to be manipulated? My phone rang again, but I saw it was a long message from Zhang Ryunin, so I didn't even open it. I just deleted it. Jiang Cheng was furious and destroying the apartment until the agent informed him that all contracts had been terminated. "You've been banned from the entire industry." He stormed off in despair, his gaze wild. 3 days later, a major legal conference began in Beijing. It was a grand meeting, bringing together all the leading lawyers of the country. The day of the debate arrived. I stood on stage, ready to defend the law, leaving all personal matters and dirty games behind. Zhang Ryunin sat in a gray dress, her gaze calm. The topic of the discussion was emotional justice. My assistant whispered, "What's going on outside?" She actually dared to come despite everything. I wasn't surprised, but simply snapped coldly, "Shut up." It was all just beginning. The assistant froze, staring at the monitor to record. The presenter smiled warmly at the audience. "Today's topic is special," he began. "When law and emotion conflict, who will win?" the spotlights beneath the stage dimmed slightly. This wasn't just a discussion. For the first time, I spoke as a representative of the legal community, emphasizing that the law must remain the law regardless of anyone's dramatic changes in sentiment. I stared only at the table in front of me. If a judge sympathizes with a criminal and a lawyer manipulates witnesses, does this world need law? I cited high-profile cases of recent years as examples. Everyone knew the truth, but public pressure often forced the court to compromise, distorting the essence of justice. The virtue of the law is to remain impartial, I concluded. It was Zhang Ruinen's turn, but she remained silent for a long time. I used to be completely rational, she finally said, looking straight at me, until I looked into our divorce case and realized that our entire agreement was based on an emotional contract. The first article of the marriage law flashed on the large screen. The law is intended to maintain harmony, but legal norms should not become a lever of pressure. And emotions are living flesh, her voice wavered. It took me 3 years to understand. It's not the number of cases you win that matters. She looked at me as if I were an actor in a tragedy. I've lost you. A deathly silence fell over the room. Zhang Ruinen slowly stood up and walked down the aisle, her eyes never leaving mine. She came up to me. I mistaken my obsession for love. Her voice was quiet, but the microphones caught every word. I realized that you are the only side of me I could never understand. I only lightly squeezed Zhang Ruinen's hand, the same hand that had signed our documents 3 years ago. I pulled away as she bowed to the audience and stood calmly as I walked past her. As I walked to the center of the stage, I declared, the law has no right to assume that personal feelings are above justice. I pressed the remote control button and our divorce agreement, signed by her 3 years ago, appeared on the screen. Zhang Ruinen's face instantly turned pale. At that moment, a man resembling Jiang Cheng appeared in the back row. He took off his sunglasses, grinned, and began throwing photographs into the air. These were Zhang Ruinen's old love letters to him. Do you want me to read you scolding Fang Yuan, a boring wooden man? He mocked. Zhang Ruinen clenched her fists in rage. This is a typical case of emotional interference in the law, I coldly tapped the podium, when personal dramas try to replace public order. The truth fell victim to their machinations, but I persevered. I looked at Zhang Ruinen one last time and ended my debate with a crushing victory. Zhang Ruinen intercepted me backstage. Yuan, trust me. I stared at her for a long time, unsure of what to say. Finally, I laughed. Does it matter? Even if Jiang Cheng is removed, the problems between us will still exist. You only love me in your imagination. I've always been myself. You were just looking for a more comfortable version of me. Your sincerity is worthless, Zhang Ruinen. As I turned and walked away, she shouted after me, if I can prove it. I didn't turn around. The sun was flooding the office in the Nanshan city government. I finished signing the last document. Ms. Zhang, are you sure you want to transfer all assets, including the 2.7 billion, to the Iron Law Relief Fund? The official asked. She firmly replied, yes, I confirm. When I walked out of the building, my assistant Hong looked at me with an undisguised question in his eyes. What will you do next? He asked. I looked at the courtyard where I had started my journey 3 years ago with 500 yuan in my pocket. It was just a return to basics. Zhang Ruinen was about to submit her documents at the Legal Aid Center when she heard the screech of tires. She turned around and saw an unlicensed car barreling toward her. The blow was monstrous. In the final seconds, she only managed to clutch the folder containing the victim's information to herself. In a half-daze, she saw the driver's crazy smile and heard, "Let's go to hell together." At Xiniao Law Firm, my heart was pounding. My phone rang with a notification. Attorney Zhang had been seriously injured. Half an hour later, I was already at the entrance to the intensive care unit of Nanchang Central Hospital. The bones are broken, there is internal bleeding, the chances of survival are almost zero, the doctor said quietly. I had to sign for her. In the end, I called her parents. The wait outside the operating room seemed to last forever. I looked at my watch while a nurse walked by, quietly conversing with a colleague. Time stood still. I always tried to maintain balance despite my status and wealth. The applause from that conference still rang in my ears, but now it all seemed so far away. 2 years have passed. We have become the most familiar strangers in the legal world. We crossed paths often, in courts, in villages where I helped widows, or in the corridors of law firms. It was as if we were moving along two parallel lines that were never supposed to intersect. I stood in the same place where Lin Jiqiang had once attacked me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Zhang Ryunin was standing 10 meters away. We looked at each other in silence in the stillness of the night. Finally, I moved toward the steps. When she touched my shoulder, a silver letter fell onto it, which she managed to catch. In an old warehouse in Nanchang, a woman wept with grief. Zhang Ryunin carefully opened the shaking door. A woman recently questioned by police was found dead, her husband hugging her and sobbing over her body. Zhang Ryunin reacted quickly, pushing the reporters aside and shielding the woman with her body. This crime can still be prevented. Stop. The man burst in with bottles in his hands, but Zhang Ryunin blocked his blow, receiving a wound to the shoulder. You should worry about yourself, she said, pressing pressure on the wound. The man, breathing heavily, muttered something unintelligible while Zhang Ryunin held on with all her might. I watched this madman across from me. A woman holding a child crouched behind him. They seemed trapped. When the police threatened to intervene, the man slowly disappeared into the shadows. Thank you, Mr. Zhang. The woman clutched her sobbing child, but I knew he would come back. He would come back to finish what he started. Zhang Ryunin wiped the blood from her lips and spat the business card out indifferently onto the ground. It's okay, the police will take you to the station. It's safe there. I'll file for a restraining order tomorrow at 9 o'clock. At 3 in the morning, she left the jail and walked alone to the parking lot. Suddenly, 5 men rushed at her from the darkness. You've gone too far, one hissed. What business is it of yours to care about other people's problems? I saw Zhang Ryunin pressed against the wall, holding an improvised weapon. She suddenly burst into laughter, pulled out her phone, and started recording. In the pouring rain, she remained icy calm. The morning of November 18, 2023, Wang Jianjun. The location is Nanchang, Northern District. I just won a national case when an assistant ran up to me and whispered a few words. I threw off my robe and jumped up. How serious are the injuries? The news from Nanchang was shocking. A famous lawyer became the victim of an assassination attempt. My life was in danger, but I stood by the window, looking out at the rain. Zun Ziu asked, should I order flowers? I shook my head, accidentally knocking over the case of papers. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Zhang Ryunin regained consciousness from the excruciating pain. On the nightstand stood white chrysanthemums, the kind of flowers usually brought to funerals. They had been sent in my name with a short note, wishing you a speedy recovery. The nurse whispered who had sent it. Zhang Ryunin smiled, and the movement caused the stitches to come undone, staining the gauze red. Why is this so cruel? Don't even try to hate me. My phone rang twice. The first time, it was a call from the hospital, and I immediately guessed who it was. But after I was awarded at the ceremony, the sound was turned off. The second time, from an unknown number. After I answered, all I could hear was heavy breathing. 3, 5, 10 seconds. I hung up. I thought I heard a barely audible sorry. 3 months later, I was organizing a charity banquet. I was the main speaker. Zhang Ryunin stood in the shadows at the back of the hall. My speech was about how the law is not a game for the elite. At the end of the speech, the waiter handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a familiar note, "You're right, no payment." After the banquet, her shadow disappeared. I prepared for new storms in this city. When my plane landed in the south, I, consumed by a strange irritation, ordered the driver to go to Zhang Ryunin's apartment. I saw a blurry silhouette on the balcony. It was an analytical document containing. In the third line, I wrote that I have won countless cases in my life. But the book of my life is written in broken sentences. I look at the lines and remember a night many years ago. We weren't divorced yet then. I stayed up all night preparing documents for him, making coffee, waiting for him for dinner. But all we did was fight. The office was quiet. I look at the papers and remember the dark circles under Zhang Ryunin's eyes. The case was closed. He had worked on it for 3 days without sleep. Do you think you'll win this time? I asked him then. He laughed in that voice I knew so well. When have I ever lost? Really, when did he ever lose? I thought I'd dedicate the rest of my life to him, but fate decreed otherwise. I closed my eyes, folded the letter in half, and put it in the shredder. Amid the hum of the equipment, the assistant reminded me about the press conference. I adjusted my suit, turned, and walked out into the blinding light of the spotlights. I didn't look back. Many years later, a new statue was erected at the Northern City Law University. It was a young man. His left hand was adjusting his hair. His right hand was extended forward, palm up. He seemed to bear the heavy burden of faith. The phrase "justice has never bowed to the wheel of love" was carved on the pedestal. On the day of the statue's unveiling, the square was packed with people. I stood in the crowd in a simple black suit, blending in with the others. A badge shaped like a bottle of celestial light glittered on the lapel of my jacket. The students whispered among themselves, looking at me. "He's a legendary lawyer. He won international environmental cases," they whispered. Someone added, "But they say he worked with Zhang Ruonen." Zhang Ruonen, a name from the past that seemed like a forgotten legend. The old professor standing next to the statue adjusted his glasses. A journalist asked him, "Is it true that they were partners in court and even married?" The professor looked at the statue, his gaze clear. "No," he shook his head slowly. "He never belonged to the law. He was a law unto himself." I stood nearby, listening with an impassive face as if he were talking about complete strangers. When the crowd dispersed, I was left alone in front of the statue. The sunset painted everything golden. My shadow, long and lonely, stretched far ahead towards the silver letter at the end of the lawn.